honeymoon suite at the Grand Celestial Hotel was nothing short of breathtaking. Soft golden light spilled from crystal chandeliers, reflecting across polished marble floors. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the glittering skyline of Manhattan, stretching endlessly into the night. A trail of rose petals led to a grand bed dressed in silk sheets, while a bottle of champagne rested untouched in a silver bucket nearby. It was a scene crafted for romance. But Elizabeth Hartwell felt none of it. Standing alone in front of the mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back at her. At just 24, her soft hazel eyes held more fear than excitement. Her long chestnut hair fell neatly over her shoulders, and the elegant white nightgown she wore, chosen carefully by her mother, fit her perfectly. Yet, she felt like she was wearing someone else's life. Tonight was supposed to be the beginning of her marriage. Instead, it felt like the beginning of something she didn't understand. She had grown up in a world where appearances mattered more than emotions. Her family, old, respected, and deeply traditional, believed in duty above all else. Love was never part of the conversation. Marriage was something you honored, not something you questioned. And that's exactly how she had ended up here. 6 months ago, her parents had introduced her to James Hartwell, a self-made billionaire who had built his empire from the ground up. He was successful, powerful, and everything her family needed to secure their future. In return, her name and connections offered him entry into a world money alone couldn't buy. It wasn't a love story. It was an agreement. They had met only a handful of times before the wedding. Polite conversations. Formal dinners. Carefully observed interactions. Nothing real. Nothing personal. And now, he was her husband. A quiet sound from the adjoining room pulled her back to reality. James was there, just beyond the door. Waiting. Elizabeth took a deep breath, steadying her trembling hands. She had been raised to do her duty. To be strong. To never show weakness. No matter how afraid she felt. With quiet determination, she stepped out into the suite. James stood by the window, looking out over the city. He turned as she approached, and for a moment, she forgot how to breathe. He was tall, composed, and undeniably striking. But it wasn't his appearance that caught her off guard, it was the expression in his eyes. Not impatience. Not expectation. Concern. "Elizabeth," he said gently, his voice calm. "You don't have to look so scared. I'm not going to hurt you." Her heart skipped. She wanted to believe him. Truly, she did. But years of quiet warnings and unspoken expectations echoed in her mind. "I'm not afraid," she said, though her voice betrayed her. He studied her for a moment, then let out a quiet sigh. "Is this just something you think you have to do?" he asked. She hesitated. What else could it be? This marriage had never been about feelings. It had always been about obligation. Before she could answer, he stepped back, creating space between them. "Come sit," he said, gesturing toward the couch instead of the bed. That surprised her. Slowly, she obeyed, sitting stiffly while he joined her, leaving a respectful distance between them. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then James broke the silence. "I'm not interested in forcing anything tonight," he said plainly. "We're married, yes. But that doesn't mean we have to rush into something you're not ready for." Elizabeth blinked, unsure she had heard correctly. "But it's expected," she whispered. He gave a faint, almost amused shake of his head. "Let people expect whatever they want," he replied. "What happens here is our decision. Not theirs." Something inside her shifted. It was the first time anyone had ever given her a choice. "Have you ever," he paused, choosing his words carefully, "been in a relationship before?" Her cheeks flushed as she shook her head. "I thought so," he said softly. There was no judgment in his tone. Only understanding. "Then tonight isn't about expectations," he continued. "It's about making sure you feel safe." Safe. The word settled deep in her chest. For the first time all day, she felt herself breathe a little easier. "So, what do we do?" she asked quietly. A small smile appeared on his face. "We start simple," he said. "We talk." And just like that, everything changed. Within minutes, the tension in the room began to fade. They ordered food, changed into more comfortable clothes, and sat together like two ordinary people, no expectations, no pressure. Just conversation. James told her about his childhood, growing up with very little, watching his mother work tirelessly to give him opportunities. He spoke about building his company from nothing, about the struggles no one ever saw. Elizabeth listened, captivated. In return, she found herself opening up in ways she never had before. About the pressure she had lived under. The expectations. The quiet dreams she had never dared to voice. "What would you do," James asked her, "if you could choose anything for yourself?" She hesitated. No one had ever asked her that before. "I think," she said slowly, "I'd travel. See the world. Take photographs. Try things I've never been allowed to try." He smiled. "Then maybe that's where we start," he said. The conversation stretched for hours. By the time the city lights began to fade into early morning, something unexpected had formed between them. Not love. Not yet. But something real. When they finally lay down to sleep, there was still distance between them, but it no longer felt cold. As James gently pulled her closer, wrapping an arm around her, Elizabeth felt something she hadn't expected to feel that night. Not fear. But comfort. And as she drifted off to sleep, one quiet thought stayed with her. Maybe this marriage wasn't the prison she had imagined. Maybe it was a beginning. Elizabeth woke slowly, the warmth of sunlight brushing against her face. For a few quiet seconds, she lay still, unsure of where she was. Then everything came rushing back: the wedding, the unfamiliar room, the man she had married. Her eyes opened quickly. The space beside her was empty. A flicker of panic rose in her chest, but it faded just as quickly when she noticed a folded note resting on the pillow. Her fingers trembled slightly as she picked it up. "Had to step out for a few calls. Breakfast will be here soon. Take your time. James." She stared at the words longer than necessary. It was such a simple message, but it softened something inside her. No pressure. No expectations. Just consideration. She exhaled slowly, pressing the note to her chest for a brief moment before setting it aside. Maybe last night hadn't been a dream after all. The days that followed passed quietly, almost gently, as if both of them were careful not to disturb whatever fragile understanding had formed between them. 3 months later, everything looked perfect, at least from the outside. They attended events together, stood side by side for photographs, and carried themselves like a couple deeply in love. People admired them. Talked about them. Envied them. But the truth was far more complicated. Behind closed doors, they were still learning. Still adjusting. Still figuring out what this marriage meant. They shared meals, long conversations, and quiet evenings that stretched late into the night. There was laughter now, real laughter. Not the polite kind she had grown up performing. James had become someone she looked forward to seeing. And that realization scared her more than anything else. Because it wasn't part of the plan. She noticed the changes in herself before she fully understood them. She started waking up earlier just to sit with him over coffee. She began talking more, really talking, about things she had never dared to say out loud before. He listened. Always listened. Not just hearing her words, but understanding them. That alone felt new. And then there were the small things that stayed with her longer than they should have. The way his hand would rest lightly on her back as they walked into a crowded room. The warmth of his presence when they sat too close on the couch. The way his voice softened when he said her name. None of it was dramatic. But all of it mattered. More than she wanted to admit. The shift came quietly. So quietly that she almost missed it. Until the day everything changed. The call from her father shattered whatever calm she had begun to build. She had been sitting in her favorite corner of the apartment, a book resting in her lap, when her phone rang. The moment she heard his voice, she knew something was wrong. He sounded defeated. Montgomery Pharmaceuticals was failing. Not struggling. Not at risk. Failing. A takeover was already in motion. Deals were collapsing. Investors were pulling out. Everything her family had built over generations was slipping away. Elizabeth sat there long after the call ended, her phone still in her hand. Her chest felt tight. This wasn't supposed to happen. Her marriage, this entire arrangement, had been meant to prevent exactly this situation. And yet, it hadn't been enough. A tear slid down her cheek before she even realized she was crying. Then another. And another. Until she couldn't stop. Elizabeth. She didn't hear him come in. But suddenly James was there, standing at the edge of the room, his expression shifting instantly from confusion to concern. He crossed the distance between them in seconds. What happened? She tried to speak, but her voice broke. The words refused to come out properly. Instead, she reached for him without thinking. And he didn't hesitate. He pulled her into his arms, holding her as if it was the most natural thing in the world. For a while, she couldn't do anything but cry. He didn't rush her. Didn't push her. Just stayed. When she finally managed to explain, her voice trembling with every word, he listened in complete silence. By the time she finished, she felt exhausted. Empty. James gently tilted her chin upward, forcing her to meet his gaze. This isn't your fault, he said quietly. She shook her head weakly. It was supposed to be, she whispered. That's why I married you. This was the whole point. His expression tightened. No, he said firmly. You didn't marry me to fix your family's problems. You married me because you were told you had to. That's not the same thing. His words hit harder than she expected. Before she could respond, he added something that caught her completely off guard. I'm going to help. Her breath caught. You don't have to. I know, he said gently. I want to. Not because of contracts. Not because of expectations. Because it mattered to her. What followed over the next few days felt almost unreal. James changed. Or maybe she was just seeing him clearly for the first time. He became focused in a way that was almost intimidating. Calls, meetings, endless hours of work, he barely slept. His attention never wavered. And slowly, things began to shift. Opportunities appeared where there had been none. Deals were restructured. People who had already walked away started reconsidering. Elizabeth watched it all happen from the sidelines at first. But James pulled her in. Asked for her thoughts. Included her. Trusted her. That mattered more than she could explain. On the fifth night, she fell asleep waiting for him. When she woke, he was standing in front of her. It's done, he said. Her heart jumped. What do you mean? It's over. The takeover's been stopped. She stared at him, unable to process it. You fixed it. We fixed it, he corrected softly. Something inside her broke open. Relief. Gratitude. Something deeper she hadn't allowed herself to feel before. She stood slowly, moving toward him. Thank you, she whispered. And then, before fear could stop her, she kissed him. It wasn't planned. It wasn't perfect. But it was real. For a split second, everything froze. Then James responded. His hand moved to her waist, steadying her as he kissed her back, gently at first, then with a quiet intensity that made her heart race. When they finally pulled apart, the air between them had changed. Completely. Elizabeth, he said softly. But she shook her head. I don't want to think about it, she admitted. Because for once in her life, she wasn't doing what was expected. She was doing what she wanted. I need you to be sure, he said after a moment. If you're uncomfortable at any point, we stop. No questions. She nodded. I trust you. And she meant it. That night wasn't rushed. It wasn't forced. It was patient. Careful. Built on something they had spent months creating without even realizing it. Trust. There were moments of uncertainty, moments where she tensed without meaning to, but James noticed every time, slowing down, giving her space, making sure she felt safe. Always safe. And when it was over, she didn't feel what she had been taught to expect. No fear. No regret. Just emotion. He held her close, his arm wrapped around her, his presence steady. You okay? He asked quietly. She nodded against him. Yes, she whispered. Because for the first time, this didn't feel like obligation. It felt like choice. And that changed everything. The morning she found out she was pregnant, Elizabeth stood in complete silence. The small white test in her hand felt heavier than it should have. 2 pink lines. Clear. Certain. Real. Her heartbeat quickened as she stared at it, her thoughts racing faster than she could control. This wasn't part of the plan. They had only just found their rhythm, just begun to understand each other, to build something real from something that had started so uncertain. A baby would change everything. Her hand instinctively moved to her stomach, even though there was nothing to feel yet. But somehow or she already knew. This was real. And suddenly, along with the fear, something else appeared. A quiet, unexpected happiness. When James walked into the kitchen later that morning, slightly out of breath from his run, she felt her chest tighten. This moment mattered. More than anything. Hey, he said, smiling as he reached for a glass of water. You're up early. She tried to smile back, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. James, we need to talk. He froze immediately. Concern replaced the warmth in his expression. What's wrong? Her fingers tightened around the test before she finally handed it to him. I took this morning. For a few seconds, he didn't react. He just stared at it. Then his eyes lifted to hers. And something changed. Emotion hit his face so suddenly, so powerfully, that it caught her off guard. We're having a baby, he whispered. She nodded slowly. I know it soon, she rushed out. And maybe the timing isn't right, and I don't even know if I'm ready. She didn't get to finish. James pulled her into his arms so tightly it almost took her breath away. And then she felt it. His shoulders shaking. He was crying. I'm so happy, he said, his voice breaking. You have no idea how happy I am. Relief flooded through her so quickly it left her dizzy. You're not upset. He pulled back just enough to look at her, his hand still holding her face. Elizabeth, this is the best thing that's ever happened to me. And in that moment, she believed him. The weeks that followed were a mixture of excitement, exhaustion, and adjustment. James threw himself into the idea of fatherhood with the same intensity he gave everything else. He read books, asked questions, attended every appointment. Sometimes he worried too much. Sometimes he hovered. But it always came from love. And Elizabeth, she changed again. Not because she had to, but because she wanted to. She began to imagine a future that wasn't planned by her family or shaped by expectations. A future that belonged to her. To them. But just as everything began to feel steady, something unexpected threatened to tear it apart. Rumors. Whispers. Stories spreading faster than they could control. Their marriage, people claimed, wasn't real. It had been arranged. Cold. Distant. A business deal disguised as love. Some of it was true. At least, it had been. But the way it was being told twisted everything they had built into something empty. Something false. Elizabeth felt it deeply. Because for the first time in her life, what they had actually mattered to her. One evening, as they sat together in silence, the weight of it all pressing down around them, she finally spoke. "We can't let them define us like this," she said quietly. James exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know how to stop it." She placed her hand over her stomach, feeling a small, gentle movement. And suddenly, she knew. "We tell the truth." He looked at her, uncertain. "All of it?" he asked. She nodded. "Not their version. Ours." The press conference was nothing like she had ever experienced. Bright lights. Cameras. Dozens of eyes watching their every move. Her heart pounded as she stood beside James, his hand firmly holding hers. But she didn't step back. For once, she stepped forward. James spoke first, calm and steady, explaining how their marriage had started. Not with love, but with an agreement. And then Elizabeth spoke. Her voice trembled at first. But then it grew stronger. "I was afraid when I married him," she admitted. "I didn't understand what this would become. But over time, we built something real. Something honest." She rested her hand gently over her stomach. "We're expecting a child," she continued. "And this baby is not part of a contract. It's part of a love we never expected, but chose every single day." Silence filled the room. Then questions. But this time, they answered together. Openly. Honestly. Without fear. The response was overwhelming. People didn't reject their story. They connected to it. Because it wasn't perfect. It was real. And sometimes, that matters more. Months later, their daughter was born. Small. Fragile. Perfect. James held her like she was the most important thing in the world. Because to him, she was. And when he looked at Elizabeth, his eyes filled with something deeper than anything she had ever seen before. Gratitude. Love. Home. Life didn't become perfect after that. It became real. There were sleepless nights. Arguments. Moments of doubt. But there was also laughter. Growth. And something unshakable between them. A choice. Made again and again. Years later, as Elizabeth stood in their home watching their children laugh together, she thought about how everything had started. With fear. With uncertainty. With a marriage she never truly chose. And yet, it had become everything she never knew she needed. James walked in, catching her lost in thought. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. She smiled softly. "Us." He stepped closer, wrapping his arm around her. "We didn't exactly start like a love story," he said. "No," she agreed. "But we became one." He kissed her gently, and in that quiet moment, surrounded by the life they had built together, Elizabeth realized something simple, but powerful. Love isn't always instant. It doesn't always begin the way we expect. Sometimes, it grows. Slowly. Patiently. From the most unexpected beginnings. And when it's real, it stays.